How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. We are back with a brand new episode. My name is Chad. With me is Leonard. And Leonard has on a very special orange shirt this week. Leonard, why don't you talk about that shirt? I guess we should give our topic. We should give our topic. But you know what the topic is because you looked at the title of this YouTube video.
Of course, that's why they clicked on it.
This week, we are going to talk about some of our tales and stories from the live events that we've been to, whether those be indie shows or WWE shows or whatever shows we've been to. So we're just going to basically have some conversation here about some of the shows that we've been to and what we experienced and how that relates to watching it on TV. So Leonard, your orange shirt will start us off.
Yes, this is one of my official Monster Bash staff shirts. Chad has been to the Monster Bash, which is a classic horror, sci-fi, and fantasy convention that my friend Ron Adams runs north of Pittsburgh, usually twice a year. We didn't have it this year. But one reason I wore this shirt to make that segue is that this isn't so much a story about going to a live wrestling show, but about a wrestler we had at the Monster Bash one time, George the Animal Steele, because he played Tor Johnson in the Tim Burton Ed Wood movie. So that's kind of why we brought in George. And also the fact that early in his career, he wrestled in the Pittsburgh area. So very well known in Pittsburgh, had matches with Bruno Sammartino in that area. So because I was a wrestling fan, Ron let me host the Q&A on stage with George Steele. And I got to have dinner with he and his wife twice during the convention. And my buddy Dan picked them up from the airport. So Dan had dinner with us as well. And when we were having dinner, George would start talking about, I went down to Atlanta for a little bit and they had me do something with blonde guy, Tommy Rich. Yeah, right, Tommy Rich. So I was doing this bit with Tommy Rich. And he did that the whole time. I was like, is his memory going? Like I was starting to get a little bit worried. But then later on, he told Dan that he did that on purpose to see what I knew.
Oh, wow.
I was going to be the one running the Q&A with him. He wanted to see what I knew, what I remembered, things like that. So the fact that
you were prepared.
Yes, that I was prepared. That I knew about his career. So I took that.
It was horror and wrestling that you were talking about?
Yeah. We talked a lot about the Pittsburgh studio era that he did, and we talked a lot about working on the Tim Burton movie. So it was mostly those two things. I know that we showed right before the Q&A with him, we showed the bit that he did on Tuesday Night Titans, where he got like hooked up to the like electric. Not like an electric chair, but like the electrodes, and they shocked him, and he did the "How now, brown cow" bit. I'm sure it can be found out there. And actually, he said about that is like Vince had this whole like soliloquy written out for him to read, like in this dramatic, Shakespearean way, like a Shakespearean monologue. And George said, you know what? Well, how about I just do that? How now, brown cow? And Vince thought it was hilarious. And they just did that instead of this giant Shakespearean type soliloquy that I guess Vince had wrote for him. But, anyway, so that's one of the reasons why I want to do this as a topic is because I have been privileged to go to a lot of different shows, particularly indie shows, and meet people and to talk with them and to have stories of them. And I know during our Big Bully music video, I mentioned that like Big Bully, I have a drinking story with Jim Neidhart, which we'll get to. We'll probably close with that one. But I have a few other things too. And before I toss it back to you, Chad, my general thoughts is I've been to several indie shows. I've been to a few WWE shows, some house shows, some that were, Raw and SmackDowns. I've been to one Impact house show. And I much prefer going to the indie shows over the big WWE shows. And the same thing with other sports. I'd rather go to a minor league baseball game than a pro baseball game. And there's two reasons for that. One is the intimacy. You're closer to the action because usually there's less people there. It's a smaller venue, so you can get closer to the action. And two is there's more intimacy with the people there as well as at the talent. At the indie shows, most of the people have merch tables and they're working their own merch tables.
Yeah.
And they're doing autographs and they're doing t-shirts and they're doing pictures. So you get to talk with these guys. And over the years, me and my buddy Dan, who go to a lot of shows together, and our buddy Ronnie, who goes to shows with us at times too. We become friends with some indie wrestlers here in the Ohio area because we go to these shows and we, hang out with them. And there's a guy who's retired now due to some nagging injuries, but he wrestled under the name of Matt Mason. And Matt would, after shows, we would go to like wherever the after party was, at whatever bar or restaurant. And Matt would sit with me and Dan and ask us what we thought of the show, which meant so much to us. But he wanted to pick the brains of two fans that he knew understood what, how wrestling worked, what they were trying to do. And we were honest with them. We thought this worked. We thought this didn't work. And the fact that here we have an actual worker, and he was damn good. I mean, he was a guy that had to look and had the chops. I definitely think he could have got to a national level somewhere, whether it was Impact or even a Ring of Honor. But again, injuries. But the fact that he wanted to sit down with us and see what we thought always meant a whole lot to us.
That's cool that, that he was trying to get feedback wherever he could.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wonder if more talent did that, how much it would help. I'm sure it would help a little bit,
Yeah, the fact that he respected us as fans, you hear stories of wrestlers who don't necessarily respect the fans or think the fans know what they're talking about, and I've never really run into that. But just the fact that he took that extra mile to hear from us, meant so much to us.
Right. Well, since we're, if we're going in order for mine, like in the 80s, when during Hogan's heyday, and when I was, a huge fan, I'm from Central PA initially. And so the nearest venue for me was Hershey, and they didn't really go to Hershey a ton. It would be like once a year, maybe, that they would go to Hershey. So, at that time, now my family was far from rich. So, if I wanted to go to a wrestling event, like I really had to work at it, and, it really had to be great timing. So at that time, I was, back at that time, I went to 2 house shows, and there's really not any exciting stories from them. We didn't have the greatest seats, but one of the house shows I went to, Hogan was headlining, and, thankfully he showed up and was there. I want to say that his opponent, I forget who the initial opponent was supposed to be, but somebody wasn't there. And I think he faced Dino Bravo in the main event, if I recall correctly. But it was a fun show. At that age, my main concern was, seeing Hogan, of course, but also getting as much memorabilia as I could. So, I had to get the ripped shirt and the hacksaw 2x4, which I wish I still owned. And I think I got the Ultimate Warrior wristbands. But when you're that age, you have to do all that stuff. But the other house show I went was when Warrior was on top. And I don't really remember much about that, but I just remember it wasn't nearly as exciting. But yeah, WWF was really the only game in town for where I was. So when they came to the area, I would try to go to it. But like you were saying, I don't know if it was off camera or on a previous episode, it was hard to get those pay-per-views. So
yeah,
I had to, the only way I was able to watch the actual events was to get a tape that somebody else had recorded on their black box. So that's how that, and the tape would do the rounds. Everybody that wanted to watch it would watch it, and eventually it would get to me, and that's how I would watch it. Because the idea of me telling my mom, hey, could we get this pay-per-view? Like, it wasn't going to happen. So, yeah. But anyway, moving along. I know you have a bunch of stories, particularly one with Kevin Sullivan, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yes. One of the best indie shows I go to, and is it's ran by Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics and his son Fargo Fulton. Big Time Classic Professional Wrestling, I believe is the name. I should double check that for coming on the air, but it's kind of a longer name that they run under.
If it's wrong, we'll make a correction.
Okay. But it's out of the Chillicothe area in Ohio. And so that's not too far for me. They do shows all around the area. And they did one a couple of years ago in Lancaster that was Bobby Fulton's retirement show. And I believe Bobby stayed retired for about a year. Now, I lied, about a month, actually. He was retired for about a month, I think, before he came back for 2 months. But it was his big fan fest that he had. And so many guys were there. Barbarian, Bobby Eaton, Abyss was on the show. Kevin Sullivan, Ronnie Garvin, J.J. Dillon was there. Jim Cornette was there. Side note on Jim Cornette, me and my buddy Ronnie, we have this theory that you can tell how good an indie show is going to be based on the concession stands. So if you've never been to a promotion before, go and check out the concession stands. If they just have like hot dogs in a crock pot and like those little bags of chips and like cans of pop or soda, depending on where you're at in the country watching this, like that show is going to suck. Like an average show, they're going to have pizza, they're going to have nachos, they probably have sloppy joes, and they use the sloppy joes to make coney dogs with on the hot dogs. If a really like top indie show, shredded chicken sandwiches. That's a really good indie show. If you
ever get out of COVID, I'm going to look at that anytime I go to a show.
Yes, go to the. If you don't know promotion, check out the concession stand first. And oddly enough, Bobby Fulton's promotion, I got to give tips to. They don't do cans of soda. They do. They pour 2 liters in the styrofoam cups, so you're getting more than you would in a can. And they also have a giant jar of pickles. And I've never seen anyone get a pickle. We've always joked about getting a pickle, but I've never seen anyone get a pickle. But they always have a jar of pickles. I hope it's like a fresh jar every now and again. It's just not the same jar from show to show to show. But anyway, we asked Jim Cornette. We went up to Jim and we said, Ronnie said this. He said, I've got a very, very important question I want to ask you. It's a question I've always wanted to ask you. And Jim, like, he hunkers down. Like, he's like, oh my God, this is going to be like the question. Like, he's ready for it. And Ronnie says, what is the worst concession stand that you've ever seen? And Jim actually pondered it seriously for a moment and said, Evansville, Indiana. And I don't remember specifically what he said, but he told us how terrible the food was at the concession stand at the arena in Evansville, Indiana.
That would be a good question to ask him, because you know that he'll, that meals are an important part.
Yes. Yeah. So he really took it seriously and really enjoyed that we asked him that. And also at that same show, Bobby Fulton comes up to us and he kind of knows us because we go to shows. And again, that's another thing too. You kind of get to know the different wrestlers and the different promoters because they just remember your face. And he said,
hey, by the way, before we get off of Jim Cornette, I have to say, and this is a very big side note, but if anybody hasn't seen the fast food video of him, and there's a few other wrestlers when they were doing OVW where he goes up to the person in the drive-through window and basically cusses her out, you need to look that up. Anyway.
Yeah. So Bobby says, hey, do you guys want to do a locker room talk? And we were like, sure. So what he was doing, he took us back, and he had it divided: heel locker room, face locker room, old school. And he said, there was probably maybe 6 to 8 of us in this locker room, and we were in the face locker room. And he said, when I was a kid going to matches, I would have killed to have gone back into the locker room and hang out with the guys. And since this is, my big retirement show, the big fan fest we're doing, I wanted to do something like this. So, and you guys and everyone there were like people he knew had been to tons of his shows. So he's like, I want to do this for, something special for you guys who I know have supported me over the years. So the heel locker room got Kevin Sullivan, who I'll have a story about in a second. And then we got Ronnie Garvin. Now, as Chad knows, rugged Ronnie Garvin, the man with the hands of stone Ronnie Garvin, is one of my all-time favorite professional wrestlers. Because when I was growing up, my great-grandmother lived in the home with us, and she would watch wrestling with me on Saturdays. And her least favorite wrestler was Ric Flair, and her favorite wrestler was Ronnie Garvin. So loved Ronnie Garvin, huge Ronnie Garvin mark. So I'm wearing a watch, and Bobby Fulton says to me, do about 20 minutes. We were back there for an hour and a half. And at one point, we're talking just a few minutes into it, And one of the guys wrestling on the show was Kid Curry, who is the son of Flying Fred Curry, grandson of Bull Curry. Also, Brian Pillman Jr. was there. He was not wrestling because he was injured, but we got to talk to Brian Pillman Jr. He's a very cool guy. Cool. So Kid Curry comes back, and he's very respectful. He said, "I hate to interrupt. I know this is special time that you guys were given to talk to Ronnie, but I was told that he worked with my grandpa, and I would love to talk to him about my grandpa. And this is about the only time we're going to have to do that." And we said, sure. So he asked Ronnie Garvin questions about his grandpa. He told stories about Bull Curry. And then Kid Curry said, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate it." Like, so respectful. And he was actually a really good worker. He wound up wrestling in the main event against Bobby Fulton. And then it came out, I can't remember who it was. It was two local, indie guys came out and attacked them, and then turned into a tag match that they won. But Kid Curry is a guy that I really enjoyed watching. But anyway, so we got to hang out and talk with Ronnie Garvin, and we talked about him being NWA World Heavyweight Champion, and we talked about him moving to WWF. I remember one guy asked him if he was upset that Vince McMahon had changed his nickname from the Man with the Hands of Stone to Rugged, because Man with the Hands of Stone sounds way cooler than being Rugged Ronnie Garvin. And Garvin said, with the money that Vince was paying me, I didn't care what he changed my name to.
Right.
He thought he could make more money off of me as Rugged Ronnie Garvin and sell more shirts or whatever. Fine. Did not care.
And that's how I got introduced to Ronnie Garvin, actually, was his WWF run. Because, the WCW stuff, it was always on at weird times, at least in my area. So, I think the first match that I remember him being in was the match with Greg Valentine, I believe at Royal Rumble. I think it was a mission match. But yeah, no, he was always really good in the ring. And, then eventually I would go back and watch some of his classic stuff. But
yeah, he's probably not obscure enough for our Spotlight series, but I could talk about Ronnie Garvin all night, because again, he's a personal favorite of mine. But anyway, at this show as well, because it was Bobby Fulton's retirement show, they had a table full of cupcakes. And you know how at like a kid's birthday party, the cupcakes have like the rings on them with the pictures. So these rings had pictures of Bobby Fulton on them.
That's amazing.
And side note, the one that I had in my car, and a couple months ago, because I left my car unlocked, it didn't get broken into. They just opened the door. But the only thing they took was a bunch of change that I had in the middle compartment and the Bobby Fulton ring, which I had in the middle compartment. That's the only thing they took. So anyway, and we were in this old fairgrounds, old fair building. It was really hot. So me and my buddy Ronnie are standing at this back door that they had open. And people thought that we were bouncers working for the show, because people were coming up to us and say, "Oh, can we go in this way?" We're like, "No, you got to go around that way and get your tickets." And wrestlers were saying, "Hey, I'm going to run out to my car and grab something. I'll be right back." So we just hung out and acted like we were supposed to be at that door. So we're eating cupcakes, and Kevin Sullivan comes up and gets a cupcake and eats the cupcake. So we're eating cupcakes with Kevin Sullivan. And we asked him if he had ever saw that before at a show. And he said, no, not in his entire career had he ever saw anyone with cupcakes.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have figures, but how many people can say they had a cupcake?
Yes, yeah, cupcakes with Kevin Sullivan. And another food story I told you I would relate was we went up to a show in Lima, Ohio called War, which is a great local indie outfit. And they do an annual Hall of Fame thing, a huge show that we went to for a couple of years. But Dan and I are sitting there, and these two guys walk by, and we look at each other and we go, "Is that the Highlanders?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think it was." And this was several years after they had been on TV. You know, the Highlanders, Robbie and Rory, they were a tag team, WWE. So they were, and Dan wound up getting a picture with them. And then afterwards, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times they would have these after parties, and we would go to these. So this was like at a country club, and Dan and I are sitting there with a big plate of nachos, and we're talking with one of the guys that we knew named Dusty Dillinger. Shout out to him, another great local talent. And Robbie the Highlander comes up and steals a nacho off of our plate, and then yells at us for not having guacamole. And and Dusty was like, "Hey, man, these guys are cool. Just chill, just chill."
Yeah, but you know what though? Why didn't you have guacamole?
After that,
What
we
kind of
kind of looked at
nachos?
each
What
other.
kind of? Well, hold on. We should get into the weeds with it. What kind of nachos were they? Just
They
regular
were
nachos with cheese?
no. They were like a nacho supreme, like beef nachos. They had jalapenos.
So
They had
it was
salsa.
nacho supreme, but it didn't have guacamole.
There was no guacamole. There was sour cream. There was salsa, cheese. I know jalapenos because Dan loves jalapenos, so we always get those on things. But no, there was no guacamole, and he
I
was
think that
highly upset
if
by
we're
that.
rating concessions, though, this one would have to get a fail simply because they don't know how to make a nacho supreme. Now, I don't know how good it was, but
Yeah, I mean, it was okay. It was okay, but again, Robbie was upset with us. But thankfully we had Dusty there to clear the air, so we end up getting into a fight with him over the guacamole. But another one. I don't know why it always seems linked to food, but another one was we were at. It was going to be an outside show at an American Legion, and I believe it was Bridgeport, Ohio, which is on the river. And they wanted to have him move it inside because of rain, and because of that, they just had chairs and tables shoved everywhere. And Bobby Eaton was there, and we went up and we talked to Bobby Eaton, and there was two chairs, just two random chairs next to Bobby Eaton's table, kind of separated from everything else. And I said, "Hey, is anyone sitting with you?" And he goes, "No." I said, "Can we sit with you?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So we sat there with Bobby Eaton and watched the show with Bobby Eaton and talked to him in between the matches about what he thought of different things. And one thing was the ceiling was really low, and a guy went up top and jumped off the top rope and wound up kicking a ceiling fan all the way through a drop ceiling tile. And Bobby was like, "You've got to know your space. You got like if you like you moved it inside, like you should change the spot."
right.
You know. But Bobby Eaton, we bought him a Diet Pepsi.
There you go.
Yes. So I don't know why everything comes back to food, but it seems like it.
Well, hey, the concessions are important as we discussed.
Yes.
You know, like in terms of indie shows, I haven't really been to a ton of indie shows. I was at one, and for the life of me, I cannot remember many details of it. I was asking one of the friends that I went with earlier today if he remembers even who headlined. The main part of that day was the fact that I had gone to the wrong venue, and it was a really small venue, and I had gone to the wrong town, and so we had to double back and go to the event, and rush there. And eventually we made it there as it was starting. I think we missed like a couple minutes, but it wasn't anything special. I remember the concessions being pretty decent though at that one.
Yeah, Dan and I went to the wrong venue one time. It was a show in West Virginia, and he went to where it had been the previous time that he had went. I had not gone with him that time, and it was like at a high school, and there was stuff going on. So we hung outside for a little bit. Then we went in, and it turned out to be a cheerleading competition. So then, one of the guys that we know, these guys will probably never hear this, but another local shout out to a guy named Jock Sampson. Dan calls Jock Sampson, who's on the card. It says, "Oh no, we're over here this time." So we get over there, but the Barbarian was the headliner.
How far away was it to the correct venue?
About 15, 20 minutes. It wasn't that far. It's just the same town. It was just across town.
Right.
But the Barbarian was there, and he was their champ of the promotion. And I got a picture with him, and he draped the title belt over my shoulder and said, "You are my champion." And then I got a picture with the Barbarian. But during the match, they came out to the floor, and he remembered me and Dan, and he came up. He's up there, Dan, and the guy he's wrestling is holding him, and he whispers to Dan, he says, "Chop me, bro, chop me." So Dan holds off and chops him right in the chest, and Dan pulls his hand off, and it's shaking like this because the Barbarian is still, solidly built for his, as old as he is. And Dan said his hand was still numb. We were driving home like an hour later, and his hand was still numb from having chopped the Barbarian.
That's amazing. You wonder how some of those guys, how they do it as hard as they do, day in and day out.
Yeah, you know, we've seen some guys, and I won't say names, that unfortunately shouldn't be doing this anymore. But we've seen a lot of guys, again, like Barbarian, who does not look a lot different than he did back then.
Right.
Still, put on a decent match and can still go, to a point. Barbarian was never a high flyer.
Right.
But we thoroughly, enjoyed it. He can still put a lot of these guys, they can still put on a match. Like they understand how to tell a story and make things work from that perspective. So
That's cool. Well, one of the other indie shows that I was at was Ring of Honor show in New York City, and I want to say I don't know if it was Hammerstein, but it was that event, and it was pretty good event, and I agree with what you had said before about indie shows and the closeness, the action is right there, and that part was really a lot of fun. It was a lot more confined of a space, but it was still, and one of the headliners was Tyler Black, who eventually went on to become Seth Rollins. And, obviously at the time I didn't, you could tell how good he was. He was in the main event, obviously, but at that time, obviously we didn't know what he was going to go on to be. So it's cool that I can say I saw him in Ring of Honor at least once. But yeah, that was a fun show too. So, are we ready yet for the coup de grace story, Leonard?
Yes, I think we can tell the Jim Neidhart story. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to work in. Various guys that I've seen, of course. But
we can tease some more before we get to the Jim Neidhart story.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of any other real specific ones that are as good as the ones that I've told. As I said, it's just fun to kind of go and have some time to meet these guys and talk to these guys and different things.
What was the biggest event you were ever at?
What
was the biggest event you attended?
Biggest event was probably a Raw or SmackDown taping. We did a couple of those at Nationwide Arena. And before we came on the air, you had mentioned about asking, have I watched any that we were at? And
right.
And I did. I watched those. And it is really interesting because when you go to those shows, there's when you're watching commercials, there's stuff going on in the arena still. It could just be a guy, walking up the ramp, or it could be them showing a promotional commercial on the big screen or something like that. One thing the one Raw that we were at, Beth Phoenix was on the card, and we were sitting up high, but I was still impressed by how big she was, physically big that she was, that even as far away as she was in the ring, to see her, she seemed like a living Wonder Woman, like an Amazon, the Glamazon, the Amazon, as big as she was. So that's one thing too, is when you see these guys in person. And we have gone to a couple house shows at the Wheeling Civic Center as well, which is a smaller venue. And one we were in the second row for. And so we got to be up close to a lot of those WWE guys. The main event was John Cena versus Randy Orton. And then the sub-main was Cody Rhodes versus King Booker. So that's how long ago that was. And also I think it was on that show, or it might have been a different show, talk about seeing guys before they were famous. Damian Sandow as Aaron Stevens was on that card as well. And he's from Wheeling, so he got a big pop when he was announced.
That's cool.
And then the second, or one of the indie shows, maybe in the third house show of WWE we saw at Wheeling, was the main event was The Shield versus Team Hell No, Kane and Daniel Bryan and John Cena. And after the match was over, John Cena sang Take Me Home, Country Roads, by John Denver, because that's, I guess, according to John Cena, that's tradition that you have to sing if you're in Wheeling. And he tried to get Daniel Bryan to sing along, but Daniel Bryan just went no to the tune. He just went no, to the tune to Take Me Home. But it was probably 20 minutes of just John Cena screwing around the ring trying to sing John Denver.
Well, those are some of the fun parts of those shows.
Yeah, because you see the dark matches, that you didn't see on. And another time, I think it was that same show, we got to see Bray Wyatt before he had debuted as the Bray Wyatt character. So they were testing out the character. I remember Dan and I were like, who's he supposed to be? He's wearing this hat, and he's got scrub pants on and a Hawaiian shirt over a wife beater. Who is it? We didn't know who he was supposed to be. And then, of course, you see those vignettes that explained what the deal was, and you go, "Oh, okay." But think about it. If you would have just saw like original Bray Wyatt just walk out without any explanation, dressed the way he was dressed, you would go,
That would be confusing.
"Yes,
Yeah.
what is this?" But they were trying out the character of Bray Wyatt, so I thought that was very cool. We got to see him before the TV debut.
Absolutely. And as you were talking there, I remembered that many years ago, my wife had gotten me tickets to a Raw house show, and I don't know why I didn't recall it when we were preparing for this. But one of the things I do remember about that show, I forget who he was facing, but Chris Jericho was in the main event, and this was a time when they were using a different type of cage, but they had brought for this event, they used the big blue cage.
Oh.
And so that was interesting to me. I'm not sure if he was facing Benoit or Triple H, somebody like that. I feel like was who he was facing, but yeah, that was a cool event. And I've been to a lot of WWE events in recent years. I was, more recently, I went to WrestleMania 29, and that was the New Jersey, New York WrestleMania. They can't just say it's in New Jersey, even though that's where it was. Like, they got to say New Jersey, New York. But that was a fun show. I went with a few friends there, and like the weather wasn't too great. It was actually raining at one point, and we were up pretty high. But I would say the highlight of that particular show, other than the spectacle of WrestleMania itself, because I always, I wanted to say I went to at least one of them in my life. And, I would say the best match on that card was CM Punk and Undertaker. That was a decent match. Overall, that card really wasn't that great. I think the Rock and Cena match that main evented, I think the Rock was injured in that match. So like that was not very great. But going to a WrestleMania is great. We actually also went to the Raw the next night, and that was, to me, more fun of an event than the WrestleMania was, simply because that event really, I don't want to say started, but if I can post a link to it, there's a whole montage of the crowd controlling that event. And that was the event, Leonard, just to give you some context, that was where Dolph Ziggler cashed in his Money in the Bank against Alberto Del Rio and won the world title. And that event, there was nothing happening really on that event up until Dolph Ziggler cashed in. And so the crowd was chanting anything you can imagine, like all through the event. I think at one point it was Sheamus and Randy Orton, and that was like the 20th time over the past couple months that we had seen Sheamus and Randy Orton, and the crowd was just having none of it. And it was amazing. It really was an amazing atmosphere because nobody cared, and we were letting WWE know how crappy the card was.
If I remember right, wasn't Ted DiBiase Sr. there working as a manager, and a "We Want Virgil" chant busted out?
Possible. And we chanted at JBL at one point, and I think he even because this is one of the few I've watched back, and I'll get more into that, but he actually had to stand up at one point because the match, he was on commentary obviously at that time, so nobody was paying attention to what was going on in the ring. We were just shouting different names at the throughout, and at one point the wave was being done in that event, so it was really fun. That was at, what is it, not the Prudential Center, but maybe the Izod Center there, but that was a fun one. And I think the most recent event I went to was Extreme Rules 2016, and that was headlined by Roman Reigns and AJ Styles, which was a good match. And Chris Jericho and Dean Ambrose were in an Asylum match, and that was a fun event too. Like nothing out of the ordinary really there, but it was. I try to go to the pay-per-views now that I have better access to them where I'm living in the New Jersey area. Because like I said, when I was a kid, they didn't really come around the Pennsylvania area too often, unless you lived near Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, obviously. Living in Hershey, it really wasn't that prominent. But it's cool to go to them now. I had actually gotten tickets to an AEW Dynamite that was going to take place, and then COVID hit. and that was the Dynamite. I can't remember what they call the event now. It was going to be the Dynamite where it was like their war games. That was what they were going to have at that point, and it just keeps getting postponed. So who knows what's going to happen? Yeah. But I have not watched any of the events back that I've seen really, aside from those clips of the Raw, just because it was really cool to watch. Because I don't know, like I like to kind of cherish my perspective of the event in a weird way, and I thought about rewatching that WrestleMania, but I never really have. I mean, it wasn't really a great WrestleMania anyway, but so yeah, I think it's cool to go to these events because you really do get to see the action in a different way, and it makes it fun. But have we teased them long enough to go to Jim Neidhart?
Probably so. And now everyone's gonna go, well, that's a terrible story. Anyway, but
at this point.
Yeah, but anyway, this is what I always consider kind of my best Indy story. So my buddy Dan, who I mentioned, who I go to shows with, he asked me to go if I wanted to go see a show at the Eagles Lodge in Wheeling, West Virginia. I won't name the promotion, but Jim Neidhart was going to be there. So I said, yeah, sure, let's go. So we go down and we get there, and the ring is upstairs, and they said, well, we're not letting people upstairs yet. Go in the bar area, have a drink, hang out. So we go to the bar, we're having a couple drinks, we're hanging out, and Jim Neidhart comes in, and he's just next to us just because there's an empty stool next to us. And he's drinking Sea Breezes, which it's kind of like a Long Island with grapefruit juice or something in it. There's like an extra juice or something in it, but a pretty strong drink. And so we wound up buying him a drink. Again, going back to food and drink. And we sat there and we talked to him about his NFL career. He played was either in training camp or was on the practice squad for several teams, Packers, Cowboys, Raiders. So we talked about, working with Vince Lombardi and Tom Landry and all these, coaches that were there when he was there and all these players. So we talked about his NFL career. And then eventually the promoter, he calls everyone over to the area where they have a stage. They have like a sit down area and a stage there in the bar area. And he said the roof leaked and it rained and the ring was ruined, so they couldn't have the show. But that they were still going to do things, there in the bar area. And they brought up.
Doesn't sound ominous at all.
Yes. Oh, it gets better. So then they brought up their champion and the guy that he was going to wrestle. And the champion was working like a Steelers fan gimmick. He was like all dressed in Steelers. Gary's a big Steelers fan. And then the guy who was going to wrestle. What?
Was he a heel?
Yes, he was working as a heel.
Of course. If you're a Steelers gimmick, you have to be a heel.
Yeah. So his gimmick was he was a Steelers fan. And then the guy who was going to wrestle was like their Stone Cold Light character, bald guy, goatee, kind of a dude. And so they're getting into it. Yeah, or Goldberg Light. Yeah, I always think of that as Stone Cold Light, but anyway, it wasn't Gilbert. It was not Gilbert.
Yeah, Gilbert.
So
he could be paying homage to Gilbert.
Yes, maybe that's what it was. So anyway, they're on stage and they're talking back and forth, and the promoter is, he's acting as like the interviewer, the guy in between them. And he said, "I tell you what, we're gonna do. We're gonna have a barroom brawl here tonight in this bar for that world title or their company title, and it's going to be you versus Jim the Anvil Neidhart." And it was like that proverbial scene in movies where you hear the record scratch, and everybody was sitting there, and there's about 25, 30 people sitting there, turns and looks, and Jim Neidhart's got this look on his face like, what the fuck? And he goes up and gets on the stage, and Jim says, "I'll do it. Pay me $50,000. And the promoter said, Jim, I know you. You're about the love. You're about the fans. You're about getting the fans what they want. And he said, I used to be. Now I do it for the money. Give me $50,000. And the promoter said, Jim, we'll get it for you. We'll get you the money. We'll pull it together. And I turned to Dan and I said, this guy ain't got $50. He ain't got 50,000. So during the intermission, we actually go up to Jim, and because again he's friendly with us because we bought him a drink, And we said, you know, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I don't know. I'll just see where it goes. So, but anyway, prior to that, they do an interview segment, and they have a guy, short little dude, who's going to interview like their Undertaker light character. And this guy's dressed like a little guy's dressed like the pimp, not Undertaker pimp. Under pimp would be amazing.
I really want to know what this promotion is. They have all these WWE light characters.
You used to see that a lot on the indie show circuit around the Attitude Era, late '90s, early aughts, the mid aughts. You used to see a lot of a guy who was sort of like.
Was he the under pimp, or is that something you?
No, that was something else. That was not that. I just made that up.
That should be a character though.
Yes, the under pimp. A side note, I will tell you, one time when I was a kid, I went to see a local show, and the main event was the Iron Warrior versus Big Slam Vader. Which was a dude dressed like Vader and a dude dressed like the Warrior.
You gotta honor the creativity there.
Yeah. But anyway, so they're doing an interview, and they wind up getting into a fight. So the bigger guy is knocking around the smaller guy all around the area, and he legit kicks him out the door of the bar area of the Eagles Lodge. And there's a short stair, 3 or 4 stairs down to a foyer. The guy trips down the stairs and legit breaks his ankle. Like an ambulance comes and takes the guy away. Legit breaks his ankle. So they have intermission, and then they do a thing where they induct Owen Hart and the Hart Foundation into their Hall of Fame that they have. Usually this promotion, what they would do is they would get a name guy to come in and then induct them into their Hall of Fame. That's what they would do.
So this promotion, who we don't know, they had their own Hall of Fame wing.
Yes. Again, I don't think they're running shows anymore, but I wouldn't want to name them or name the promoter.
They have their own building with the Hall of Fame in it.
I know. And actually the thing was, because they didn't have like all the stuff set up that they would have upstairs, they took like a chair and they put like a bed sheet, and they showed like a video that they had made on the back of the chair. It was like the Hall of Fame induction video.
It would be cool to be a member of any Hall of Fame, but if you're going to be showing, stuff on bed sheets, then it's like,
Yeah. So they do the Hall of Fame inductions, and then
please tell me this wasn't the promotion that the Insane Clown Posse ran.
No. It was not them. It was not them. But afterwards, they do that, and the promoter said, "Hey, a lot of you know that we had an actual injury earlier tonight. And because of that, we are not going to do the barroom brawl. We are not going to do that. We're not going to risk everyone's health. But I tell you what, next time that we're able to, we have a show, and we're going to be upstairs, we're going to have the ring, I'm going to invite Jim Neidhart to come back, and it's going to be the 2 guys from before, the champ and who was going to be his opponent. You 2 are going to be a tag team, and you're going to face Jim Neidhart and whatever partner he wants to have." And Jim Neidhart said, well, if I'm coming back and I got to have a tag team partner, it's going to be my tag team partner, Bret Hart. And, of course, everyone cheers. And on the way out the door, we say goodbye to Jim. And I say, hey, Jim, you're going to bring Bruce Hart, right? And then Jim laughs. He said, hey, Bruce was a pretty good worker. But needless to say, and he was. All the Harts are great workers. Absolutely. But needless to say, Jim never came back.
Say it ain't so.
No, and I know that they did hold a few other shows there that Dan went to, but I never did go to another show. But I call that the Jim Neidhart fiasco story, and Jim Neidhart fiasco would also be my band name if I would ever form a band.
That would have been a good title for that event, even though we didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, the Jim Neidhart fiasco. But again, just to close on a little happier note, Jim was totally cool to hang out with. Of course, he's passed away now, and really enjoyed the time that we had. Again, that was the whole kind of reason why I wanted to tell these stories. Not, oh, hey, look at him telling all these stories about people he's met. I think they're fun stories. They're great experiences. I love to share those experiences. And I think it shows that a lot of these guys, where you might hear stories about some of them not liking the fans or being kind of jerks to people. A lot of them, especially the old school guys, are absolutely fantastic, and a lot of the indie guys who are trying to work their way up or just doing it for fun. I mean, we know guys who do it for gas money. Hey, pay me enough to get there and back, and do it for the love, and that is fantastic. So
And you got to get to know these guys on a human level,
yeah.
and like separate them from their characters. Like these guys have family, and it is cool to talk to them. A lot of these guys also go to movie conventions, as you
Yeah.
and I have seen, and it's cool to see them. I don't always want to, if I paid money for all the photographs of the people I wanted to meet, it would cost a lot, but it is still cool to see them together. So Leonard, is there any show you really want to go to that you haven't gone to?
Oh, well, I would love to go to a WrestleMania just to have that experience, like you said.
Right.
Ring of Honor would run at least once a year in Columbus, where I'm at. And I always wanted to go and just never have. It was either I forgot about it or I didn't hear about it till late that they were going to be in town. So I would love to go to that. As I mentioned, I did go to one Impact House show when they were here in Columbus.
Right.
I would love to go to AEW now,
Right.
just to go and have that experience. We mentioned on the Keeping Up with the Curtain Product show about NWA Power and how they do a studio show, and supposedly they're going to be coming back. But I would love to, and I know they tape a bunch of shows together, so it's pretty much like a whole day's worth. You're there all day, and they're taping, a month, 2 months worth of shows. So I would love to go to one of those tapings like that. And sorrowfully too, I mentioned that the big old Bobby Fulton Fan Fest I had been to a couple of years ago. They were going to have another one back in late March, and that got canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And unfortunately, they haven't rescheduled it, but a bunch of guys are going to be there for that. And as you've mentioned in other videos, I also worked as a journalist in the local area, and I got to interview Nikita Koloff because he was not that where the show was going to be at was outside of my coverage area. But Nikita Koloff also talks at churches and does ministry. And he was going to actually talk at a church the day after inside my coverage area. So I was able to score a phone interview with him, and he was fantastic to talk to. He was super nice and told me great stories. And what was really neat about him is the idea that, he was so committed to his gimmick while he was playing it. And now he, freely admits he's not Russian, and it was just a character he was playing. And he told me a story. He said it was not too long ago. He was doing an appearance in North Carolina with Lex Luger, that he and Lex Luger do some ministry work together. And a woman came up to him and was speaking Russian at him and had a little girl with her, a smaller girl with her. And Nikita just kind of smiled, nodded his head. She keeps on speaking Russian. And then he says, ma'am, I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian. And she was so mad. Like she was just completely irate. And, it's something he had been, clean about for, more than 20 years now.
Right.
That he wasn't a Russian. But something else he told me, which I'd never heard of before, was that he was in character all the time when he was Nikita. If he was out at a restaurant, if he was working out in the gym, he was Nikita. He was in character. And because of the character, he actually got an audition and play Ivan Drago for Rocky IV.
Oh, wow.
And went to Hollywood and stayed in character the whole time.
That's cool.
And met Stallone and did this. That he thinks it actually lost him the role because Stallone was like, well, I can't work with this guy.
Right.
Where if he would have went to the side and went, hey, I'm a dude from Minnesota and, I'm just a regular guy. And that, but he was, because that's what he was taught, was that you commit to the character and
he was too method.
Yes. He actually officially changed his name to Nikita Koloff.
Oh, like
that's his legal name now. And it's funny because I don't know, because my editor, whenever I do stories on wrestlers, because if there's ever like a wrestling show that comes to like our coverage area or a wrestler comes to town, like Ted DiBiase did one time, like I talk to him. I just do it. I don't even tell her. I just, hey, I did this interview. But she always wants their real name.
Right.
And I had to tell her Nikita Koloff is the guy's legal name now. And I should mention while we're here is that the fact that Madison Rain is from our local area.
Oh, okay.
And I've interviewed her several times, and she's the sweetest thing and wonderful to talk to. And I've talked to her on the phone. I've met her in person. But she lives in Columbus now, which is where I'm at now. And she's billed as being from Columbus now, but she's originally from West Lafayette, which is a very small village in Coshocton County, which is one of the papers I work for is based. And there used to be Ohio Championship Wrestling was in Coshocton. They've moved. They're now based out of the Canton area, I believe. So I haven't been to one of their shows in a while. But she got her start here in the local area. And so I knew her back when she was starting out, and interviewed her for the paper right when she was starting to work for Shimmer, and then later on when she was working for Impact and different things. And so she's always been fantastic to talk to over the years. Ted DiBiase I interviewed when he came to town. I interviewed Shark Boy over the phone. I interviewed Buff Bagwell over the phone. Jake Roberts. I'll tell you the Jake Roberts story, and we'll end on the Jake Roberts story. So in 1999, I was interning for my local hometown newspaper, the Zanesville Times Recorder. And this is the first week I'm on the job that they're going to have an indie wrestling show, and Jake Roberts is on the card. And Jake Roberts is going to come in the day before to do like some promotional stuff. So I get to go up to the auditorium to meet Jake, and so does the local TV station. So I let the TV guy go first. And he says to Jake, he said, hey, we do these bumpers in between commercials. So could you like put me in a headlock or something for the bumper? And Jake says, that's my job. I don't mess around with that. I don't play with that. Like, if you want me to seriously kick your ass, I will do that. And the guy said, no, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. So they do the interview. And guess what his first question is?
Is wrestling fake?
Yes. Yeah, that's his first question. Now, to Jake's credit, he gave the wrestling is a sport with athletic people. Like he gave kind of the non-committal answer. Right. Because at the time, it was, again, 99. I mean, kayfabe was pretty much broken, but so he does the bit with the TV guy, and I could tell he was just not happy.
Right.
So I get up there. Now, unfortunately, I had a female photographer with me, which I think maybe greased the wheels a little bit. And so I asked him all the standard questions about doing the show and such forth. And then I say, so the coal miner's glove match, was the wheel rigged? And he looked at me, and in his eyes, like, oh, this guy knows. And then so he said it was not. And then we talked for like 45 minutes, just talking about. We talked about the Savage angle, with the Cobra and all that. So I got to talk to him for like 45 minutes.
Well, he's a good storyteller and all the stuff.
Oh yeah, he was very cool. Once he understood that I was a fan, but I didn't fanboy on him.
Right.
I asked knowledgeable questions. And a lot of guys that way. Shane Douglas was another guy. I talked to him a couple times on the phone. Same way. When I could tell even on the phone that he was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. And then usually I ask the standard, questions about, how you're looking forward to the show. Have you been to our area before? What do you like about doing these smaller venues? Have you worked for this promotion before? Blah, blah, blah. And then I start asking about specific matches and stuff that I'm never going to use for the article, but stuff I want to know. And we talk about general stuff. So Shane Douglas was that way. Wow. But then as I'm talking with Jake Roberts, our photographer gets a call that we have a wildlife preserve near us called the Wilds, and they had a baby buffalo born. And do we want to go out and see the baby buffalo? So on the same day, 1 week into the job as an intern, I got to interview Jake the Snake Roberts and view a newborn baby buffalo.
And
So that
what
was
a transition that is.
that was the day that made me say, hey, I like this. This could be a career. This is some fun stuff.
Well, that's very cool. If I were to go to one show, it would be cool to go to a Tokyo Dome show. I would love to go to a wrestling show in another country. But specifically, I think it would be cool to go to a wrestling show in Japan, just to see that atmosphere. But
yeah, I think the experience of just being there would be amazing. And I should mention, Mitch, about just wanting to go somewhere else. A few years ago, I went to Boston to visit a friend of mine who lives in Boston now. And he said, hey, what do you want to do? And we went up going to a Red Sox game. And actually, one of his neighbors was a former member of the New England Patriots. So we went up with him to when they were having an alumni meeting, which we didn't get to go to the meeting, but we got to meet some guys going in, and we hung out at the stadium. But I said, I want to go to an Indy show. And we went to an Indy show in the Boston area, and John Cena's dad was working as a manager on the card. But he didn't come out during the intermission because I wanted to get a picture with him, of course, and an autograph. But he was working heel.
With John Cena's dad?
Yeah, but he was working heel, and I don't think he wanted, he was probably old school, and he's like, yeah, I'm not going to go out because, people are going to want.
I don't think we can call John Cena's dad old school.
I don't know. Maybe he thinks old school.
Yeah.
But he did not come out because I would think that he would do pretty well doing pictures and autographs during intermission. But again, I was just in another city and went, hey, I think it would be cool to go to an indie show in Boston, and we did.
That's funny. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Nitty Gritty, and we will be back at you next week. Maybe not next week, maybe the week after, but it'll be PN News. PN News is coming. So,
that will put asses in the seats, as they say.
That's right. So stay tuned. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.